Welcome Year 7 history students to this explainer. Grab your gear because today we are embarking on an absolute epic of a historical adventure. We're traveling back in time to witness a dramatic, high-stakes moment that completely reshaped the world. The story of Hernán Cortés and the conquest of the Aztec Empire. Now, this is a tale of massive ambition, unimaginable wealth, and a brutal clash between entirely different worlds. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this is the massive question we have to answer today. How on earth did a tiny group of just 600 men sail across the ocean and challenge one of the absolute greatest, most powerful empires in human history? I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, right? But it really happened. To understand how this completely unbelievable event took place, we first need to understand the world they were living in.
Section 1. The Age of Exploration, setting the stage for conquest.
So, imagine living in Europe during a time when huge parts of the globe were literally completely unknown to you. Europeans were taking to the seas, desperately searching for unbelievable wealth, new land, and new trade routes. This was the age of exploration, and it perfectly sets the stage for the guy at the center of our story. Hernán Cortés was born in Spain in 1485, right as this era was really taking off. And here's a fun fact, his parents actually sent him to school to become a lawyer. But, well, instead of studying law, he chose a life of dangerous adventure. By 1519, he packed his ships and sailed from the island of Cuba straight toward the coast of Mexico.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is understanding who these guys actually were. Cortés was what the Spanish called a conquistador. In Spanish, that literally translates to conqueror. These men were this gritty mix of hardened soldiers and really ambitious explorers. When they showed up on a new shore, they weren't just tourists checking out the scenery. No way. They had three main goals on their checklist: claiming new land for Spain, spreading the Christian religion to new populations, and, of course, becoming incredibly rich and famous back home.
Section 2. Enter the Conquistador. Why Cortés went to Mexico.
Put yourself in his shoes for a second, Year 7. Would you cross a terrifying, unmapped ocean just based on a rumor? Well, Cortés did. He was driven by a powerful mix of motivations. First and foremost, gold and wealth. He had heard these absolutely unbelievable stories of lands overflowing with riches. Second was power and fame. He knew a successful conquest could turn a regular, everyday soldier into Spanish nobility. Third was his deep drive to spread Christianity. And finally, just the sheer thrill of adventure. The idea of discovering lands no European had ever laid eyes on before, that was a risk he was totally willing to take.
Section 3. The mighty Aztec Empire, a rich and advanced civilization.
You see, Mexico was definitely not some empty piece of land waiting to be claimed. Not at all. It was the home of a massive, incredibly powerful civilization known as the Aztec Empire. Just picture their capital city, Tenochtitlan. Imagine this engineering marvel built right out on the water of a massive lake, packed with towering stone temples, brilliant canals, and bustling, noisy markets. To put that into perspective, at the exact moment Cortés arrived, Tenochtitlan was actually larger, cleaner, and more populated than major European cities like London or Paris. It was a literal metropolis.
Section 4. Cortés's crucial advantages. The underdog versus the giant. So we've got this massive, highly advanced empire sitting there in Mexico, and then we have Cortés pulling up on his boats. On paper, this looks like the greatest mismatch in military history. Why? Because of this one crucial number right here. Cortés only had about 600 men with him. Seriously, 600. He is staring down an empire that controls millions of people and commands tens of thousands of fierce warriors. How do you even begin to challenge a giant when you are such a massive underdog?
Well, he had a few secret advantages up his sleeve. First off, technology and weapons. The Spanish had heavy steel armor, guns, and these really loud cannons. Plus, they brought horses. Now, the Aztecs had literally never seen horses before. In fact, many initially thought the Spanish cavalry riders and their horses were terrifying, two-headed monster beasts. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, allies. The Aztecs had ruled through power, and many indigenous groups fiercely disliked them. Cortés cleverly allied with these enemies of the Aztecs, like the Tlaxcalan people, and instantly grew his tiny army into a massive force. And finally, his leadership. He was utterly determined, strategic, and willing to make really bold, incredibly risky decisions.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds. The historical collision. Two leaders meet. So gathering his men, his terrifying new weapons, and his Tlaxcalan allies, Cortés begins this dangerous, determined march inland toward that gleaming city on the lake. And this march sets up a face-off that feels exactly like a heavyweight boxing match. On one side, you have Hernán Cortés, the ambitious, gold-hungry Spanish leader who has risked absolutely everything, and on the other side, Montezuma II, the incredibly powerful ruler of the mighty Aztec Empire, who was treated by his people essentially as a living god. These are two completely different worlds, coming face to face for the very first time in history.
Now, you might think that the second these two groups saw each other, some epic battle just exploded. But actually, it didn't. It was an incredibly tense standoff. Montezuma actually welcomed Cortés into the city. For a brief time, they played this highly dangerous psychological game of chess. They exchanged lavish gifts, but behind the polite smiles, both sides were secretly studying each other's weaknesses. But as we know from history, this fragile peace could not and would not last. Eventually, that tension snapped, and a brutal conflict broke out that would change the history of the Americas forever.
Which leaves us with this final burning question. How exactly will this clash of empires end? What happens when the peace finally breaks? How does an empire of millions actually fall to the Spanish? Well, year 7, the full, unbelievable story of this massive historical conflict, the battles, the betrayals, and the final dramatic conclusion, awaits you in your upcoming lessons. Get ready, because the true history is honestly wilder than any fiction. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.